My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. This episode is brought to you by Rainmakers. But here's the thing, it's not the word Rainmakers. It's the word Rainmakers with no vowels. RNMKRS, Rainmakers. How will artificial intelligence change the future of sales? Will it help us do more, replace us? Join Rainmakers virtual sales competition to see AI in action, helping thousands of students get massive role-play practice and feedback on a bias-free level playing field, and it's free. To join the movement, go to rainmakers.org. Again, that's RNMKRS, Rainmakers with no vowels.org. Hey, thanks for tuning into the Sales Lab. This is part 3, the concluding episode of our discussion with Steve Awtrey and Elli St. from Nova Consulting. Cover a lot of ground in this episode, again, as we have before. I've called it Twist the Lion's Tail. It talks a little bit about the value add of research. Why would we take a systematic, investigative, possibly even intrusive approach toward assessing and managing a sales organization? Well, because if you want to know what the lion's really capable of, you got to get out there and twist its tail. You can only learn so much from mere observation. Of course, we'll cover some other interesting ground, talk a little bit about treating sales calls conversationally. At the end of the day, you're still a person talking to other people, letting go of the outcome to get the outcome, having a plan, but not being too rigidly tied to it, being able to be in the moment. And of course, we'll get some book recommendations from them. Thanks a lot. Hope you get something out of it. What in your backgrounds led you to become Salesforce consultants? I mean, where did each of you start and how did you come together? And tell us the story.
That's an odd
yeah,
tale.
I was going to say.
That's an odd tale. So I'm a former practitioner. I spent my career after leaving the Air Force in sales, and I've sold for large organization. I've been in leadership roles as well as individual contributor roles in large organizations, as well as small organizations, startups. And I spent all of my career, again, outside of the Air Force once I left, in a sales role. So selling was my profession. And when we decided to launch Nova, that was kind of the groundwork for it. Let's just take what we know and let's go sell that to others. I met Elli through a mutual friend, and we immediately hit it off. She had been very successful running her own leadership coaching organization. But we found that on that human behavior level, we really clicked. And from my vantage point, Elle's going to tell you her story. From my vantage point, it's like, wow, to have a scientist, because the other partners are practitioners, to have a scientist among us would be awesome. So I finally got up the courage one day, and it's one of those awkwards, hey, have you ever thought about partnering with somebody? And I'll just leave you with the rest of that story.
Sure. So, I have an odd background for a sales person, I guess you could say. So I started my career as a music therapist. And I guess most of my selling experience has been selling to somebody the idea that they could be healthier. My interest has always been in psychology. So that's where I started. And then besides the clinical work I've done, I was always in the habit of reading research because I keep wanting to understand why people do what they do. I'm just fascinated by it. And I was fascinated by business. And I wanted to own my own business. So a lot of my early career stuff was around certainly learning to be a better clinician, but it was always like, okay, well, to be a better clinician, I need to know why people do what they do. And I would read a lot of research. So that was just like an ordinary thing for me to do. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to that. And now I get to read psychology studies all the time. Woohoo! So then what's been interesting is that when I worked for agencies, I was often responsible for finding my own clients. I did a kind of therapy called outreach therapy, which meant that I was a clinician who went to schools, homes, other agencies where they didn't have therapists on staff. And so I would talk with legal services and social services and doctors and other healthcare providers. And if you had asked me if I was selling, I would have probably been appalled at the time. But what's so fascinating by joining Nova now is I realized that I have been selling services for a very long time. Yeah. And when I had teams, I would be responsible for making sure that they also had clients to do therapy with. So it just got to be this thing where, I would reach out and I would chat with various people that could provide referrals to the agencies I worked for and help build up the programs in the agencies I worked in. And so it just was so fascinating. And then after I was clinician for, I think over 17 years, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something else. And I went and trained as a coach, and I started coaching, and I started working with small business owners. And then I worked my way into working with CEOs of small businesses, and everything that they wanted from me was the fact that I had the psychological background, that I would take the time to understand and explain to them why people do the things they do using theories. And they found that helped them run their own businesses more effectively. When Steve ended up recruiting me for Nova, I was at a point where I had been in business for over 10 years, but I was getting kind of tired of being by myself. I wanted something new or different. And he's like, well, so what do you think about sales? I was like, okay. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm looking for a new adventure. Yeah, I like this. We would just have these conversations over coffee, and we'd have to look at each other and go, you know what? It's been like an hour and a half. We need to go back to work and, go our separate ways. So at the end of the day, it was really cool to jump in, and I dove into sales performance research and discovered that there are a lot of parallels to leadership development and sales performance development, and thought, well, that's interesting. So some of the concepts I didn't have to learn. I just had to apply them in a different setting. And since then, it's just been fascinating diving into more about why people do what they do. So I'm still answering my question. And I probably will be answering my question until I die, I suppose, because I'm just so curious about why do people do what they do and how to make sales. And I have to say now I have much, much deeper respect for sales. I see it as a craft. It's a really interesting line of work.
It is. I mean, there's nothing else. The elasticity between the effort you put in and the output that you might get back, right? The way that you close your sales. I think I talked about this in a prior interview. I can't quite recall who, but the idea that I could be calling on 10 people a day, 10 people a week, whatever, depending on the context. And the vast majority of those people tell me no, tell me to go away, reject me, don't show up for the meeting, whatever. But if I sell a few of those, then I'm still technically successful. And there's not very many professions that work that way. Maybe boxing, something like that, right? You can be the champion after taking a beating. It's a very weird way to win, like you just won the championship. How do you feel? Oh, I feel like I just got the crap kicked out of me, actually, but I guess I'm the champion. It's okay. And there's definitely some unique psychological things associated with that. But, accountants, I hope, don't fail 70% of their accounting effort. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if you are on a assembly line in a factory and you screw up 70% of what you do, you're not being successful. You're getting canned. But in sales, it's very strange to me.
Yeah, I have to agree. It is an interesting line of work in terms of how people get described as successful.
A thought that popped in my head earlier, and then the conversation went in a different direction. But the above the waterline and below the waterline, obviously that's a kind of a widely used analogy for different things, right? I mean, you can find that in probably a lot of sales books talking about, what the actual problem is that the customer might be trying to solve, right? It's okay, well, here's the tip of the iceberg, but then really the big problem is down here and you have to dig it up. But it seems to me that if you go to the bookshelf at Barnes & Noble or wherever and start pulling these books out, I mean, you're going to get a lot of the same material. To me, it seems like a lot of that material is just covering that above the waterline issue. And it's sort of like, okay, everybody's saying the same stuff about the things we already know about. What about all the other stuff? Why are we still rewriting the same book that tells you, hey, there's a tip of the iceberg up here? And say, I know, I read that in 50 other books about these icebergs, right? So it's interesting. And that's, as a researcher, I guess that's kind of where I, see my value add to the world or to society or whatever, that, let's say even if we know most of everything we could possibly know about sales, which I'm not sure is true, but let's just say it is, we know 80% of what we need to know about selling, right? Well, that means everybody knows that 80%. Right. That means if you as a company, you want to have some sort of competitive advantage or do things differently or uniquely in a way that allows you to capture more of the market, that means you got to get off script. That means we got to really start playing with that final 20%, right? I'm sure you guys have heard the old analogy, saying or phrase or whatever that twist the lion's tail. Essentially, for the listeners, the idea is if you want to learn about a lion, you can actually learn quite a bit about it. Let's say 80% about it by observing it passively, by staying out of its way, by putting it in a zoo and watching it and taking good notes. I mean, you can learn a lot about a lion, but if you really want to know what the lion's capable of, you have to actively walk up to it and twist its tail. And all of a sudden, the behaviors you've been observing of the lion are out the window and you've got a lot of new stuff to learn. And so I think that's what the function of research is, right? Is to say, okay, we've got a lot of this stuff figured out, but now let's go a little bit deeper. And we're getting further and further into the fringes, trying to find new ways to help improve salesperson performance or reduce turnover. But it's like, it has to be at this stage of economic development and knowledge, it has to be a less obvious thing, right? And often an outcome of that is the return on these findings might not be that you increase your sales 1,000% or something, because we're working in the margins. It might be a 5% bump, a 10% bump. You know what I mean? It's more marginal, but that's because everybody is doing a lot of the right stuff already. And we have to figure out how to, capture that remaining 20%, if that makes any sense.
And that's what we call, that's what our call is to our clients and really to the craft, is go deeper. Don't just settle for what you see. Be curious when you go into those conversations. I mean, when we talk about the advanced sales conversation, it's simply a framework that's built on a foundation of human behavior. And that's just, as we've talked about, it's just so deep and diverse. And the minute you think you know it is when you don't know it. So, it is a call to continuous learning, being curious, always questioning, never being satisfied, because the sales topology as we know it has shifted and will continue to shift. And in which direction, we don't actually know. But what we do know is we need to be agile and open-minded and be willing to look deeper than just what we think.
And by taking all of that, just simply having a conversation, not trying to sell anything, just have a conversation. And that conversation does have, everybody knows there's an agenda. I mean, it's a sales meeting, so everybody knows there's an agenda anyway. But the idea of taking all of that we've talked about today and just saying, let's just have a conversation. Let me get to know you and how you think and how you feel about it. And here's where I think we might be able to help you out with it. And let's just be people. And that's really our biggest bottom line point. It's just be people.
Right. And your job in any sales situation is to gather information. The information is the golden nugget. And he who gathers the most information is going to be the one that will win the day. And that's not just the cognitive information. That's what's going on behind the scenes.
Those vivid personal details.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because there's like kind of common advice to salespeople or young professionals, maybe in general, that if you're going into a conversation, if you're going into a meeting, you need to have a clear-cut objective, maybe, as we discussed earlier, a hierarchy of possible objectives. Mm-hmm. But, I've gotten a lot of value in my professional and personal life just by wandering around with absolutely no plan and bumping into people and having an open conversation with them and finding out, hey, you know what? There's something we can do here. We can work together. We're jiving in some way that if I had come with an agenda, if I had showed up and been that maybe too polished salesperson, then it would have turned them off. We would have never gotten to this point because, this person's just trying to bark their agenda at me, get me to accept their recommendations. Like, well, I don't know. Sometimes there's value in just dumbly, blindly wandering around and seeing who you run into. I don't know.
Being present in the moment and being open-minded enough to take in things that you might have discarded before.
Yeah. Yeah, like letting go of the agenda that there has to be a pain, because there are customers who are looking for opportunity. And if you're looking for pain, you're not going to hear opportunity.
Right.
So that idea of not being married to a specific spiel or script or language, or I need to get my stuff out to you, that meandering, that wandering is a much, much more real experience for both you and the potential customer.
Well, and I'll tell you, on the research side, we've been doing a very deep dive into some data, and I know that you guys know some of the work I do is on kind of intra-organizational social networks and patterns of relationships. And we're basically trying to look at the antecedents to these valuable social network relationships that drive performance. And two of the variables we look at there, this is a project with Chris Plouffe, who you guys mentioned earlier. Hi, Chris. Hope you're listening. And using his navigation constructs. And one of them basically said, okay, well, there's a task-driven navigation where you say, I need to find somebody in financing who can help me figure out how to get my prospect approved so I can close a sale. And it's very strategic and directive, and there's a purpose behind it. And the other type of navigation, organizational navigation, is simply exploratory, where you say, I don't really have any reason to do this, but on my lunch break, instead of sitting at my desk, I'm going to wander down the hall and just see who I run into. Meet somebody I don't already know. And it turns out that exploratory navigation is very important in achieving some of these social network positions, some of these relationship patterns. And I think it's because you end up finding people that it wouldn't necessarily occur to you to go look for in the first place, right? If you had a specific task in mind that you were trying to take care of, you might not realize, oh, if I go talk to Jennifer over in HR, it turns out she used to work in finance and knows about this. But, you just run into, it opens up for some serendipity and some randomness, I guess.
Yeah, we often, and Elle kind of coined the phrase, let go of the outcome to get the outcome. It kind of describes that. It's like, don't have the agenda, just be present in the moment.
Yeah.
It's like holding on to a fish, you can't hold on to it too tight.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Or does that reference only float in Florida, or you guys have fish up in Massachusetts, right?
We have a few fish.
Okay, good.
Something like cod.
Yes.
That's
Lobster.
not a fish. Oh, all right.
If it's wet, it's a fish.
Okay, all right. Tastes good.
Do you guys have any book recommendations for books that you think all sales leaders should have on their desk or on their bookshelf?
We do. Now, we did this as an independent study. I want you to understand that first, right?
Okay.
As an independent study, you sent us this question. It's like, okay. And we came and we were sharing answers the other day.
Our first two answers are identical. So we highly recommend To Sell Is Human by Daniel Pink.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want a description of why, but
sure. Yeah.
All right. So To Sell Is Human is great because it talks about not merely that we're selling things or services, we sell ideas. And to understand that even asking a friend, in fact, I was doing that this morning. A friend of mine and I have a birthday next week. And we were like, hey, what do you want to do? And like, do you want to go to a restaurant? Oh, this is this COVID thing. Or should we, can we hang out and order out and like have a meal on one of our porches? And so we're selling to each other the idea of having a mutual birthday dinner together. And so that's the idea. It can be something simple like that. Like, hey, I'm feeling like this. What do you think? Oh, all right. I see your point of view. Oh, I don't know if I like that idea. That's To Sell Is Human. The idea that we sell more than just things. We sell ideas. And it happens all the time in all of our interactions, not all of our interactions, but a great number of our interactions with each other.
And it's a great way for your listeners to actually go and look and see that, wow, we do actually all engage in some level of persuasion. And he has a nice way of bringing some of Cialdini's work into the conversation. So it's a great, we recommend it to clients as a must read.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, great.
So the other one that we agree on is called Emotional Agility by Susan Davis. We have just, and what she goes through is she takes you through a journey of understanding things like anxiety and sad, all your emotions. And she has it's kind of a 3-step process where you show up to that emotion. A lot of times those emotions actually control the way what we do, say, and they literally control us, right? And so she forwards this idea of who's going to show up. Is it going to be the thinker or the thought, right? And she calls you forward to examine those emotions and how they're driving you, either good or bad. Then her second step after you show up is to step out or step away from it, get perspective on that emotion, and to find out really kind of from just a distance view, it's like, what's going on here? How is it affecting me? And then the third part that she recommends is doing a values inventory and to walk those values. So we find it really good, especially in times where you've got uncertainty like COVID, right? And leaders dealing with followers and helping followers deal with things. So that would be our second kind of widening the field read for sales professionals. And then we had different third choices. So
all right. So for sales leaders specifically, the Arbinger Institute does this really interesting work, and they have a book that's been out for years now called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it actually parallels nicely, or it's a nice companion piece to emotional agility. It's important for leaders to do internal work and understand themselves. Where do they get stuck? And so with leadership and self-deception, it's done as like an analogy or a parable. And it talks about a mythical company and how they learned that they were in the box. And when you're in the box, it's very easy to define people as if they're stereotypes. And so when you're out of the box, it helps you actually see people as just people, and that they have flaws. That even the person that drives you the most crazy has good points and bad points. So there's that paradoxical thinking. And so I highly recommend Leadership and Self-Deception for people that want to be more authentic leaders and really understand themselves so that they don't get in their own way.
I did an interview last week that'll probably be the episode right before you guys' episodes with a gentleman named Alex Homer, and he brought up the exact same book. So as soon as you said that, I was like, wait, that sounds familiar. But so that's interesting. 2 recommendations for leadership and self-deception in less than a week. That's pretty good.
Great. And then my third would be it's a fun read simply because of the track that she takes, but it's all about deciding, gathering information, really connecting and syncing up with those around you. It's called The Biggest Bluff by Maria Kinakova, and she uses poker as the storyline. And she is a psychologist who learns to play high stakes Texas Hold'em poker. And she is being taught by one of the masters in the game. And it is a great read for somebody wanting to understand literally how to read the table. What are the tells? How do you connect with and sync up? I learned by reading her book, I learned who the most successful predator in the animal kingdom is.
Uh-oh. Who is it?
Well, take a guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing something that doesn't look very threatening based on the setup, right? Something that's a surprise. Let's go with.
Buy them.
Let's go with. There's a snail that I saw in the 72 Dangerous Animals that has a very poisonous sting. Is it that snail?
No, it is not the snail, but
okay.
Okay. So most people will go for like lions or cheetahs or wolves. So cheetahs have about a 48% kill ratio. The lions are about half that, and wolves are like 14%. The one creature in the animal kingdom who has the highest kill rate, which is 95%, are dragonflies.
Wow.
Interesting.
So in our coaching with sales folks, we want them to become dragonflies.
That's it for this interview. I hope you got something valuable out of it. Of course, if you did, be sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.